Mordhau is a first-person medieval combat game that just came out April 29th and already has been a huge success for its developers, Triternion. The game is probably one of the most realistic simulators for medieval combat to date, and that means you just can't run in swinging a sword and expect to come out on top. But to help you along, here are 10 useful tips and tricks to get better at Mordhau. Hi, I'm Wes Malik from SegmentNext, and here is what you need to know. Remember to hit that bell icon to get all notifications on our future content. Helmets. Probably the most important thing to remember in a game like this is the importance of helmets. You remember all those fantasy movies where the heroes never wear helmets? Well, don't put yourselves in their shoes. Instead, think of what if it would be like if a sword hit you in the side of the head. While you would probably live if you were wearing a helmet, without one, your head would suddenly become a meteor achieving escape velocity from your body. So, remember everyone, safety first. Spacing. Medieval combat had a lot of long and very destructive weapons at the disposal of its soldiers. But at the same time, if you're not careful, you could be just as much of a danger to your allies as you are to your enemies. When you or a teammate has a great big battle axe or a massive two-handed sword, be sure that your teammates are spread out in a far enough formation that when you get into combat, that weapon won't be hitting you or your friends just as often as it will be hitting the enemy. Don't be afraid to switch things up. Mordhau isn't just some fancy fantasy term that Triternion used to title their game. It's also an actual term used in the German schools of medieval fencing. Mordhau is when you take your sword by the blade, almost like you're using it as a club in order to bash your enemy's brains in. Many of the weapons in Mordhau have alternate grips like this, and you should learn how to use them in order to keep your opponent off balance during a fight. For instance, during the Mordhau grip with a sword can save your life during a fight with a heavily armored warrior because some of these alternate grips, like the Mordhau grip, do more damage to opponents with a lot of armor. So don't be afraid to experiment. Stamina. Much like many games that are heavily based on melee combat, stamina is also going to be a very important part of how you play Mordhau. While going in and swinging your sword wildly may work at first, eventually your stamina bar will drop low enough that your character won't be able to swing it, and you'll have to pause for breath. If you're up close and personal with an opponent, when that happens, they'll be able to get in more than a few free hits on you, and even knock your weapon out of your hand and kill you. So be careful with your swings. Your perks. When you start playing Mordhau, you'll start off matches by creating a character that you can use during gameplay. Along with customizing your look and whatnot, your character will also make use of a variety of perks that can dictate what weapons they use, what kind of armor they wear, and various skills that they can have. You should always be aware that these perks exist and know what they can do. For instance, the Peasant quirk, if you take it, would limit you to just using farm implements. Bloodlust lets you regain more health after a kill, and Friendly reduces damage that you take if a teammate accidentally hits you with a weapon. Know your horses. This being a medieval combat simulator, jousting is going to be a big part of the combat. In order to be successful at jousting, you need to know your horses and the lances that you'll be jousting with. One good lance shot can take you out of the fight pretty much immediately, so you'll need to learn the differences between actual cavalry lances and polearms. Lances are longer than polearms, so if you use that one on a horse, you'll hit first. However, you must also take your horse into account, because getting to full speed on a horse will let you couch your lance into jousting position, where it can do the most damage. Which horse can get to full speed first is the most important, because you'll close the distance faster and couch your lance faster, which can mean the difference between life and death in a joust. Your loadout. Before every Mordhau match, you'll get 16 points to spend on armor, weapons, and equipment. While you can use this to kit out your character any way you want based on perks, you'll still have to keep in mind how much each piece of armor and each weapon costs, and build yourself according to that. So while you might want to be a heavily armored juggernaut, slow-moving but almost unstoppable, you might also want to be an archer, capable of lots of damage from afar, but also very squishy. Your perks will also dictate the armor and weapons you can use, so synergy between your perks and your weapons is important. Know your weapons. Mordhau has a wide variety of different weapons in it, all of which have their own strengths, weaknesses, and uses against different types of enemies. Facing a heavily armored opponent in a one-on-one duel, a mace would likely be best for that to beat past their heavy armor and deal out some real crush damage. A sword is best when you're fighting lightly armored opponents so that the blade can dig in and do damage to them, along with its wide swings. Carrying a spear, you're probably best sticking with a group of other spear users or concentrating on fighting enemies that are on horses. While it's not required that you use these weapons in their particular roles, you won't be as effective using them any other way. parry, parry, parry. Once again, while simply going into a battle swinging non-stop can end up going well for you at first, sooner or later you'll come up against a more experienced player who knows the game's mechanics and can take you apart easy. This is why it's always important to keep in mind your primary defense, parrying. Just like how parrying can keep you alive in a game like Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, it will do the same thing in Mordhau. Learning how to block an enemy's attack and then counterattack will be one of the best ways that you can deal damage to them while keeping yourself alive. Weapon ballistics. While they're not necessarily bullets, Mordhau will still be full of things like catapults, bows and arrows, throwing axes, throwing knives, and more. While chucking these with wild abandon might net you a few kills, you should still be wary about not only your projectile not reaching the enemy, but also being caught by the enemy and thrown back at you. While this is less of an issue with arrows and catapults, throwing axes and knives still have this risk to using them. So be sure to practice with these weapons first before you try and use them in combat. Hopefully all of these tips that we've given you will help you be able to get better at Mordhau. If you've ever played Chivalry Medieval Warfare while it was still popular, you might have an easier time with this. But in the meantime, if you want to try and play Mordhau for yourself, you can currently buy the game exclusively on the PC for $29.99 or your regional equivalent.